I'm Rob Downey, a family practice MD and Institute for Functional Medicine certified practitioner. I'm coming to you from Seaworthy Functional Medicine in Homer, Alaska. Seaworthy exists to help people overcome their health challenges and be fully vital. What is the current state-of-the-art set of affairs in what's happening with the microbiome, and what can we do with that information to leverage the kinds of outcomes we want for ourselves and for others? Today, we could not be more fortunate than to be joined by a thought leader and citizen scientist, and so many more amazing, wonderful things, Martha Carlin. Martha, thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much, Rob, for having me.
Well, it's really a privilege, and getting ready for today's interview told me again, one of the reasons I do what I do is just because I get to be inspired by folks like you, and you have just a whole bunch of things I hope that people check out. You've been motivated and inspired by your husband's Parkinson's, and undertook your own, from my perspective, functional medicine journey to look at the root causes and the physiology. You've got this business background, and you've got an NIH grant to expand our understanding of the microbiome. You've got some of the world's leading scientists in the gut microbiome looking at how folks can help you by submitting samples to tell us more about the microbiome. You use systems biology to then determine how these things are working. You have a set of products that are systems biology driven in terms of people being able to push physiology in optimal direction. So just what you're doing, I just think is the coolest.
Thank you so much. I've had a lot of help along the way.
Right, right. Many of us that do what we do, I think, have this we experience, the power of we. It's very rare in this setting for me to hear from somebody that they well, I've never heard anybody think or presume in this setting that it's kind of them solely. It's very much about it's kind of a systems biology of people that care.
I love that. Yes.
And go to wise people to achieve their objectives. um, so the related challenge today is again the sign of the best thought leaders I get to work with. There's so much that we could go into, and so I just want to not make the what would it be? In journalism, it would be burying the lead. I don't want to bury the lead. We have two objectives today. One is for folks to go check out just the Microbiome Collective and all of that. And like great thought leaders, you've got a brilliant website, super well organized in terms of how people can check their microbiome, contribute to citizen science, use some brilliant products and see what happens. I'm trained to look at stuff like that. So if people did that kind of thing, then I could help them kind of determine how to measure their outcomes. But also you've got this really cool parallel track for people that are concerned about Parkinson's, presumptively, avoiding it, treating it, adjunct work, all of that. And so people could also check out Martha's quest and you and your husband's journey. And so just want to say right up front, these are kind of the calls to action. I think the best place to start today would be, we've got a lay expert audience. We've got people that are really passionate about this. They've done a lot of summits around the gut microbiome. So probably the best thing to do today would be to say, as you've done this deep dive into it, what do you want people who are interested to know about how your work then translates to them having better immunity or less inflammation or protecting themselves when they take antibiotics? How has that systems biology type stuff you and your team do, translated to this state of the art?
Sure.
Is that a good place to start, or am I jumping too far ahead?
I think that's a good place to start. I mean, I founded the BioCollective back in 2015 after reading Dr. Martin Blazer's book, Missing Microbes, and kind of making that connection, because I knew that many people I had talked to with Parkinson's had had multiple strep infections and other types of infections, or had taken antibiotics in their teens for acne. And so that really resonated with me, this loss of the microbiome and how that might be impacting us. And then a few months later, the first paper came out that showed that you could actually, so Parkinson's has two primary types. One is people that have a tremor as their primary symptom, and the other is a posture and gait issue. And Dr. Philip Shepperhan showed that you could basically segment those two different categories by the gut bacteria. And that was such a eureka for me. So, we started funding some research personally at the University of Chicago, where I met Dr. Jack Gilbert, who was kind of one of the early pioneers and is still a big leader in the microbiome space. And we saw these connections across diseases. So my other co-founder was Dr. Suzanne Vernon, who had been at the CDC studying chronic fatigue. And we said, we've identified these single diseases, but really, if you start to look at the microbiome and that underlying system, there are many things in common across these diseases that present in different ways, which ties very nicely into functional medicine and looking at the differences in the person. But so we started to build a biobank of fecal samples and do the whole genome sequencing, which most people were not doing. So we could really look very detailed at the functional genes that were present, to also to see, for me early on in my journey of trying to figure out what was causing Parkinson's, I looked at the food supply and genetic engineering of food, and I wanted to see, can we see evidence of these engineered genes in the microbiome? And so, for our first 5 years, we collected fecal samples and made them available to researchers around the world to do research. And of course, we had a my heart-based focus on Parkinson's. So that was our largest sample collection. And then we shared that and have had, publications that have gone on to kind of fuel more microbiome research. There's now, thousands of papers on Parkinson's and the microbiome. So, but, one of the, I think the biggest learnings for me along the way is how we are so much more microbial than we are human. These important functions that the microbiome is doing for us. It is, making vitamins and hormones and neurotransmitters. And it's really that primary factory that does so much for us. And, when it gets damaged by antibiotics, where we lose some of those valuable contributors, or through other things that we do that damage the gut lining, and then it starts to, we get these the gram-negative bacteria produce these endotoxins that cross over, and they can cause inflammation anywhere. So it sort of goes to your weak spots. So could be arthritis, could be your brain. It can be any number of places where this crops up from an unhealthy internal ecosystem.
Yeah, I don't, in my practice, I don't, I mean, the core teaching from the Institute for Functional Medicine is that in terms of the domains of physiology, gut function and up and downstream impacts on gut function are the cornerstone and foundation of health. And so I think that this audience, what happens for them is that the systems biology and the brilliant things you're describing get contaminated by the Western industrial or Americanized, sort of mechanized. If it's a tablet or a capsule, it's like a drug. It's got one point of impact. It's got one mechanism. And what I reviewed on your work shows this parallel in that uh, systems biology is the human physiology like an ecosystem in nature, not like a machine. And so we could talk for days about how you got to work with folks smart enough to translate the science full circle back into the clinical outcomes, right? Because that's part of the genius, is to have people who understand it well enough to say, if we go make these shifts in this ecosystem, how is that going to turn into clinical success for folks? But let's do this. Let's say if somebody tries your approach, what can they affect? Do they go base it on their symptoms? I saw that you've got products for sleep or for immune support or to protect the microbiome in the setting of antibiotics. How would you recommend they deploy what you built?
Well, maybe the best place to start there is with the first product I built. So,
Uh-huh.
the first product is called Sugar Shift, and that was really the concept for that product came from, I attended, John and I went to the World Parkinson's Congress in Portland, Oregon, and there were some researchers there who presented data from an animal model that showed that the sugar alcohol mannitol could stop the aggregation of the proteins in the animal, and also could pull them out of the brain and clear the trash. And so I came back and bought a mannitol chemistry book. I mean, it's a little skinny book, but I mean, then I was like, wow, this is like one of the most interesting molecules. But the first chapter in the book was about the bacteria that produce mannitol and those that use mannitol. And so I started to look at that, and I was very fortunate at the time to have two advisors, one who was a fermentation chemist and the other who, had 35 years of teaching microbiology and microbial ecology at Cal Poly. And, I was like, how can we put together a team of bacteria that can basically restore this into the gut? And if you look at fermentation chemistry in an industrial setting, in order to increase protein production, they make the media more acidic.
Mm.
And mannitol is a neutral molecule. It's a free radical scavenger. So I've learned so much more about it from that perspective. But so we looked at it and we came up with this team of microbes that could convert glucose and fructose, which we knew there was way too much of in the modern diet, and it would convert that into mannitol. And we tried it first with John, measuring his microbiome along the way. And
Mm-hmm.
what we saw at that time, he was walking with a cane, and we saw within 30 days, he was no longer walking with a cane, and his microbiome was moving back closer and closer to the human microbiome healthy profile from the 2012 data. And so we're like, wow, and we weren't really thinking, we would be a product company.
Mm-hmm.
And so then we used some computational modeling. Was very fortunate. One of Jack Gilbert's postdocs came to work for us, who basically built our bioflux model, where we can model out how microbes work together as a team, just like humans or in a factory. You
Mm-hmm.
don't want all your factory workers doing the same thing. So you build a team that can actually come to the end of, the manufacturing line and have produced what you want it to produce. So, we did that. We modeled our formula, and it produced the mannitol. And so, we started taking that concept, and I sat down with Dr. Kano, who's the microbial ecologist, and said, okay,
Mm-hmm.
let's lay out, and we laid out about 25 different metabolic issues. These vitamins, or, this metabolite, tryptophan for sleep, or melatonin, and started to map out a roadmap for making products to restore the factory in the gut. And, along the way, we were doing a lot of other scientific work. with our NIH grant and stuff. And then when COVID came along, we actually stopped collecting fecal samples during COVID
Mm.
and started to focus more on the products.
Mm-hmm.
And that computational model allowed us to really hone in and make products that work. And then we went on to actually do a clinical trial with Sugar Shift. Um, so Dr. Kano was born in Cuba and had developed a relationship there. So we were able to do a very cost-effective, robust clinical trial in a diabetes cohort where we showed one of the most significant things that we showed in that process. So there's animal models in diabetes, Parkinson's, depression, and I think some other things where endotoxin is used in the animal to develop the symptoms. And so I said in the clinical trial, can we measure serum endotoxin? And they said, yes, we can. And so, we measured the endotoxin, and that was one of the biggest shifts we got. But so we got improved insulin and HOMA IR, and in the first 90 days, we got stabilized blood glucose fasting and postprandial. But at the end of the double-blind trial, we unblinded and took some subjects and kept them on for another 90 days. So at 180 days, we got a 14% reduction in HbA1c, and then a statistically significant reduction in postprandial blood glucose also.
And Martha, to what degree do these shifts in the microbiome then persist in its own reiterative state of maintaining optimal? One of the things that comes up a lot that's really fun in functional medicine is these gut restoration and repair protocols. Sort of the phrase itself implies that when the microbiome as a self-perpetuating community is given the opportunity to shift favorably, there are many instances where then it will persist in a more optimized state given, uh, you know, is this something? And then another group of supplements, people choose to stay on them because that's just the reality, is that the benefits don't tend to persist to a great degree when they're off.
Well, so this is a question we get a lot, and we have not studied it, but I think it would be interesting to go back to some of the subjects from our trial
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
see if it has persisted for them.
Mm-hmm.
What I would say, at least here in the United States, there are so many things that damage the microbiome in the
Mm-hmm.
food supply, from glyphosate residues to food preservatives to emulsifiers,
Mm-hmm.
that unless you are just hyper vigilant about what you're putting in your body,
Mm-hmm.
it can be quite difficult to maintain the state of health of the microbiome. And glyphosate actually is, has been one of my,
Roundup.
Roundup, my pet study projects for 20 years, because I had some sense that that was implicated. And we have a strain of, glyphosate is patented as an antibiotic. And in that patent, it is actually more detrimental to the lactobacillus and bifidobacteria that we know are very important for our
Mm-hmm.
microbiome health. And it is not effective against a number of the pathogens. And so we actually, in all of our formulas, we have a strain of Lactobacillus plantarum that we found fermenting wild elderberries from Colorado that was resistant to glyphosate, and also able to break it down using what's called the third pathway that doesn't produce another metabolite called AMPA that is even more toxic. And so we feel like, at least for some remediation, you might want to take it periodically
Yeah.
to ensure that cleanup process. And we're actually in the process right now of doing some additional work to show how much it can remediate over a week's time.
Mm.
I'm just doing laboratory,
Mm. Oh,
tests.
brilliant. Gosh, I've gotten the tingles at least 5 times since we started talking today, and I know the folks who hear this are going to be really moved and intrigued. I should I should briefly, I think, mention something for our audience that has two things. One is that what a remarkable person you must be to start from the ground up and do what you did. The degree of rigorousness and curiosity that you demonstrated to put this together from the ground up really shows in how you articulate where you're coming from now. And it fits the thing that's lit me up uh, for 18 years now since I first heard the father of functional medicine talk, that when we think about it's an ultra commonsensical thing to do to get down into these deep levels of where things come from. But also, there's only a subset of folks whose minds appear to work in the fashion where then they can take the next step and say, what are these shifts we make in these teams that are kind of come back full circle and let these good things happen? And so when I hear you talk about something that can work radically well the way you're describing, let's think about sugar and protecting the gut microbiome from glyphosate slash Roundup, et cetera. If people make a play in that domain, they're going to get so many upstream and downstream benefits in every other domain: inflammation, gut brain broadly, neuroplasticity, gut barrier integrity. What I usually find is that people who do really well take impeccable care of themselves, uh, not to the point that they get freaked out or stressed out, because then that flips backwards on them. And on average, they have 5 to 12 state-of-the-art supplements that work well together and play well together. And they add or subtract them because we don't live in the world of hunter-gatherers. And then they figure out which things they need to start and stop. And there's really only a relatively small subset of things that work brilliantly well. Part of what you and I do is try to connect people to stuff that works brilliantly well. So I just wanted to stop and kind of flag that for folks, that these dream teams can be built, but it only takes a certain kind of mind and a certain kind of team to put the dream teams together. That's just part of the genius of people who do it well, and clearly you're one of them.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. A lot of, I think the credit also goes to Raul, who he was actually a pioneer in use of microbes to clean up oil spills and,
Wow.
rebuilding
Yeah.
terrain to enable the native microbiome to come back and to help break down the oil. And
Ah,
so, that
yeah.
deep understanding of how that can happen when you restore the terrain.
Yeah. Oh, let's talk terrain. Let's definitely do this because Catherine Clinton is a hero of mine and does a lot of work on terrain theory. And if you're cool with it, I'd like our audience to hear more about that because it ties into a functional medicine concept, which is also near and dear to naturopathic medicine, called the body knows the way. And this is another thing I wanted people to get a chance to understand today. Uh, Personally, I'd like to disabuse people of the notion that one strain of probiotic or one supplement is like a drug, in that I don't, I think that creates an unhelpful impression. I mean, it may be true to some degree some of the time, but the key part that it misses is that folks in contemporary settings feel that they're broken and that the body is broken. It's a broken machine. We live in a broken society, a broken world. It's just so depressing. And the news is so much better than that, that our bodies, our microbiome, our systems are incredibly resilient. Our brains are neuroplastic. We do have pathways to deal with these chronic and cumulative toxicities. And so the premise is that the body knows the way, and the focus then of terrain theory from what I've learned is by looking at the native terrain and what it's meant to do and restoring native terrain, uh, the microbiome, et cetera, then these good things happen because up and downstream of this reinvigorated terrain, the body gets back to all the brilliant things it knows how to do. Is that on target, or am I off in the weeds here?
No, I think that is very much on target. I think where back to that one supplement being the perfect thing as you are reshaping and rebuilding terrain. I mean, that's a process. I use the farming example a lot of times. If you bought a farm that was overgrown with weeds and in bad shape, the soil wasn't healthy, you have to take you have to address the weeds first, and you have to address the nutrient content in the soil, and prepare the ground so that it can accept and rebuild the healthy microbiome. And so I think that's sometimes where people can stumble a bit. And over the years we've learned and altered and tried new things, and some things have worked, other things haven't, or some things have worked for a while and then you have to adjust. And I think that, again, back to the systems biology and listening to the body. And this is something really, after all these years, in the last year, that has really accelerated for me through a relationship with several scientists who have been trying to help me with John, is really listening to the specific symptoms, like what's happening at what time of day or after you've eaten, and learning to look at body temperature and pH, and how that's impacting what's going on, oxygen levels, things that for 22 years we've been going to neurologists and nobody's ever taken a
Yeah.
blood sample.
Yeah.
It's not, you've got some metabolic problems going on here, and or they don't understand constipation, and they just go, oh well, it's normal if you only go 2 or 3 times a week or once a week. Some people are like that. I mean, that is not actually accurate. And one of the most interesting things, not in the literature anywhere, but in our laboratory, as we were collecting fecal samples, the people in the lab who were processing samples for us said, they came to me one day and said, we can tell someone with Parkinson's by their stool sample compared to anybody else, because it's like concrete. So we use a syringe to aliquot all the other samples. We cannot do that with Parkinson's. We have to use a coffee gun. And I'm like, this is something that neurologists have no understanding of. And that ultimately led me to a colloidal chemist who understands like the battle between the microbes and how those colloids are being formed. And we're working now on, how do we address this, the battle in the system that is creating, turning us to stone, if you will. And then it blocks the GI tract and you can't absorb the nutrients from it. So you're starving to death, and it's producing all these endotoxins.
I'm just going to pause for a second and acknowledge just this is the best of the best. What you're describing, this is the best of the best. The curiosity, the rigorousness, the engagement, the forward leaning, and there's so many things you shared that I have a lot of compassion for my conventional only colleagues, in that I'm a hybrid. So I'm a product of, as a board certified family practice MD for 23 years, I know how they were trained and how they think. And one thing that's deepened my compassion, not for your benefit, but for our audience more, is that I finally realized there's this thing of cognitive dissonance. That the trouble is, again, a certain set of minds and temperaments can hold two ideas at once that compete heavily. But physicians probably can't, the majority of them can't show up for work with the level of cognitive dissonance to say, if bowel function and temperature and symptoms are mission critical for properly treating Parkinson's, they would either have to quit what they do and go, get trained by you and your team or get IFM certified, or they have to reject one of the ideas and keep doing because otherwise it's sort of destabilizing to one's confidence. There's a second set of us, and I don't know why we're built this way, who really like cognitive dissonance. For me, it's just the outcomes. I can't get the outcomes that I want unless I handle a massive level of cognitive dissonance, which was almost debilitating early in my career. So that's kind of one thing worth noting. But
Well, I would
things you
interject also that the microbiome can really throw a lot of cognitive dissonance into the equation because um, as I look at a lot of the Parkinson's papers, they'll find a paper and they find a microbe and it's like, this is the cause, or, this is a potential cause. But as you start to look into the metabolic capabilities of that particular microbe and what's going on in the whole system, it's like, okay, that bug there is trying to address this over here. Now it may be killing you, but it's actually remediating this problem over here. So like you can't, I mean, you can't just say, okay, go get that bug and that's going to solve the problem, because
right.
microbes have many, many talents. And if they can coexist in a society together,
Mm-hmm.
all sort of do their jobs and
Yeah.
keep each other in check, you have a happy society and it works. But
Well, I'm smiling now. Thank you for your interjection, because the dots we get to connect in these conversations are the dots I hope that people connect. I hope they have a broader and more vibrant and more hopeful conversation with themselves and others than happens in conventional media or the news. And so some of this goes to something that might come up from Thich Nhat Hanh, the Zen Buddhist, who said, any of these things that arise in our emotion, we say, hello, my dear, come and have tea with me. And so if the premise is that this bug is the enemy and we're going to go double tap it with an antibiotic and then things are going to be better, we're wrong footing things from the start, as opposed to saying there's a reason that it's in the milieu. We go look at that and we thoughtfully, it would be like a team member that we're giving bad marks as a manager because they're not getting their quotas met, but they're undergoing divorce.
right.
We should go look at what's happening on the team, how to build something around them. And these teams, when we go reset a certain number of things, then production just grows up, morale goes up, sick days go down. Because I've noticed the system really tends to, I've had people have this Chris Kresser described phenomenon where just when they have a positive psychology of their daily existence, their microbiome shifts. This one blows me away. What's going on with that, Martha?
Well, so there's an early pioneer in the field of microbial endocrinology. His name is Mark Light. I think he's at Iowa State now, but he was in Texas for a number of years. And his work has gone on to be expanded by John Cryan at University College Cork in Ireland, who's written a book with Ted Dinan called Psychobiotic Revolution, which is a great, I mean, it's pretty well written for the layman if you want to
Uh-huh.
understand this. But I think what a lot of people didn't understand before Mark's work was how many of these neurotransmitters are made in the gut and by the bacteria, and these loops that can get going. So like you can become stressed, which creates a neurochemistry and a chemistry in your gut, and that feeds certain microbes that then feed the brain, that feed, so you get this sort of vicious cycle loop. And so it is really, really important and missing, I think, from I know from allopathic medicine, this understanding of the the emotional and the stress component of how that feeds our disease. And if we can start to work on being at peace and having gratitude and having gratitude even when our body is broken, for what is it teaching me? It's doing something to teach me. And I am eternally grateful to John, because I think he got the hard part of the job,
Mm-hmm.
is listening to his body to teach so many other people. And from that, others have taught me even more, because, you start to get those pieces. But that, that brain loop and the microbial endocrinology, I mean, your mind will be blown if you look into his work, and the number of neurochemicals that are made by the bacteria in the gut. And they can also eat the good things. So, there's been Parkinson's research on H. pylori eats dopamine. So if you're taking a dopamine medication, what they've found is a lot of times it's feeding the H. pylori. So the more dopamine, the more it eats the dopamine, the more dopamine you need, the more, it's again a vicious cycle.
Mm. Mm. Well, what lights you up the most? You're well into this now, right? And so what are one or two things you want to share today? That tomorrow we couldn't have these conversations anymore. You couldn't get the word out. What are one or two things you know now that you think lay people who love this, what do you want them to know?
Well, I really do want people to know how damaging glyphosate is to the microbiome. And I've started to see more understanding of that, but I still have a lot of people who, when I say glyphosate or Roundup, you know, don't really understand the implications of it. And, as a part of what we've done in my conversations with Raul as we started to make products, I said to him, we're pushing a string up a hill if we can't fix our food supply.
Mm-hmm.
We can't fix our soils if we can't address, because there is so much, and it's not just glyphosate, there are so many organophosphates,
Mm-hmm.
and phosphate drives the energy in the body. So we're putting all these chemicals that impact us, and what I say is what we do out there is not out there, it's in here. And
Mm-hmm.
so we've gone on actually to have Raul has a company called Ancient Organics that works on the soil microbiome and breaking down glyphosate and restoring soil
Mm-hmm.
ecosystems the same way we do internally. So
Oh, bravo.
it's
Thank you,
really
Raul.
important. Yeah, it's really important for people to understand that. And they have an Indiegogo campaign going on right now. If people would like to go contribute or buy a sample. And then, I think just having people understand how having the right product to restore a function in your microbiome can have, one small thing can have a really significant impact. And, we saw that with our clinical trial. We're working on the publication right now for the impact on the microbiome. And what was so amazing about that data is, people will sometimes say, well, do you see it colonize the gut? Well, these are travelers through the system, but what they do along the way is they, we had 900-fold improvement in detoxification genes. And we had, the restoration of bifidobacteria and Faecaliprosnitzi and Roseburia, which are, 3 keystone species that flourished, taking the sugar shift formula, because we cleaned up the system and allowed what was there and hiding to flourish. So I think there's often a lot of discussion about, well, does it colonize, or, don't you want it to just work in the colon? And, probiotics, they're producing things all along the way. So, this obsessive focus on just having something work in the colon, I think is, a little bit foolhardy, because much of the nutrient absorption happens in the small bowel. And that's where that fructose and glucose is getting that, spark to the brain. And
Yeah.
so we're going to clean that up. You really need to do that up, in the upper GI tract, not colon.
Thank you for both of those observations. I want our audience to get to hear from me anecdotally what I've seen in 18 years of functional medicine, which is that the people who do best, folks have heard this from me for a million times, but it can't be overstated. Uh, you know, you can't lifestyle your way out of a mental, emotional, spiritual deficit. So you have to know who you are, be comfortable in your own skin, be at peace, be positive. And then when the lifestyle is in place, including really carefully avoiding uh, glyphosate slash Roundup, et cetera, via things that are well laid out by Institute for Functional Medicine, Environmental Working Group, et cetera, avoid those exposures. Then episodically and carefully looking at the status of the microbiome, it's the single highest yield data set. So there's all these things people can look at, but because of this unique dimension of the microbiome, what is it, 100? Is it 1,000-fold more genes of the bacteria than us? What's the scale of magnitude? Is it threefold?
It's somewhere in the neighborhood between 100 and 300 times more genes.
Yeah, yeah.
And
So these organisms, oh, sorry, go ahead.
well, as I kind of started looking into monogenic diseases, if you think about it, like I think in many cases, the microbiome was our primary genetic function for that. So then if you lose the microbiome piece that's producing, those enzymes or whatever that
Mm-hmm.
metabolite is, then it becomes diagnosed or apparent that you have this monogenic genetic disease. But
Mm-hmm.
if the microbiome is there, you don't
Mm-hmm.
have it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, oh, thank you. I just find people who really are interested and do really well. They use a team like yours or other, well vetted, well validated measures to look at the status of the microbiome from time to time and make course corrections. And then they just steward it very carefully during the intervals that they're focusing on something else like thyroid or adrenal or heart rate variability or meditation or exercise or sleep or positive attitude.
I mean, it is really important to have, physicians like yourself who are able to help somebody look at it. Early on, this was kind of interesting because we had such comprehensive data because we got every gene in the microbiome. And so, we had like this 60-page report of all these details, and people would take it to their doctor and they get the cross-eyed look. Several times I did have one or two physicians who were open to having a conversation with me, and I talked to them about, what I saw and sent them some papers to look at. But they were, in large part, back to that cognitive dissonance. And in one case, a Parkinson's patient who had a very high level of proteobacteria, and her neurologist was my husband's neurologist, and I tried convincing the physician to refer, our friend to an infectious disease neurologist to try to address it. And we could not get the doctor would not take the referral. And,
Yeah.
it's like, if you can't get, and that has come up a number of times, even with John, where we looked at mycobacteria, and we have lots of evidence of the implication of mycobacteria, potentially in Parkinson's and a number of autoimmune diseases. It's very hard to get on a sequencing because it's hard to lyse and it's low abundance, but it
Mm-hmm.
has, broad implications throughout the body. But trying to get a doctor to listen to that, I mean, it's, it's like,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
not working. We're pounding our head against a door. And so, we look
Mm.
for ways to address it.
Mm. Gosh, I would say in my world, Institute for Functional Medicine certified practitioners are the ones that care about that deeply, but also that have the confidence to lean in and make a move that's safe, but that's assertive enough that something good happens.
Yes, I would agree with you.
um, Now, can people work with BioCollective independently, get the data, try your products, retest without the involvement of somebody like me? Or do they do better if they have somebody who's trained like I am?
So we actually don't do any of the testing anymore. So we
Okay.
recommend if they are going to test their microbiome, they work with somebody like you,
Okay.
or we have a couple of microbiome labs or Genova Diagnostics, Doctors
Hmm.
Data. There's a
Okay.
Nirvana biome. So Nirvana and microbiome labs, I think you can order yourself and they send you a report, but it's not quite as actionable. Genova has a lot of good actionable information, but it's also not fully comprehensive.
Hmm.
So you're kind of balancing out, what information you're getting. But I always tell people, um, if they want to look at their microbiome, they really need to get with a functional medicine practitioner or somebody who understands the gut well to help them through that process. Because you can do a lot of damage trying
Hmm.
to fix it yourself if you know, don't know what you're doing. And
Hmm.
so I think that's pretty important. I mean, I loved it when we were doing samples and I was able to look at them and talk to people, but that's not my primary focus. And
Hmm.
so, it has been, I think, helpful for me to step away from that. But and also nice to see now after 9 years that there are a lot of well-trained functional medicine doctors who know how to look at the
Mm.
microbiome
Mm.
and
I'm
help
happy
make
to
those.
hear that. Well, uh, where can people find you, Martha? We've talked about it a little, but it's worth stating overtly here at the end because there's two tracks, right?
Sure. So there's three places. So if you really want to go deeply into the science, you would go to the biocollective.com, that's the whole story of where we started and all the science we've done. And then the products are available under the brand name BiotiQuest. That's
Hmm.
BioTiquest.
Hmm.
And Sugar Shift is our best-selling product, but we have a heart, sleep, immune, we have a yogurt culture, and then we have antibiotic antidote for helping restore after you've taken antibiotics. And
Mm.
then Martha's Quest, which is my personal blog where I write about Parkinson's and the microbiome, but also other alternative health and supportive things like Qigong and meditation and ways to address the stress level in Parkinson's.
Beautiful. Cannot thank you enough for your time today. I just feel all lit up. Thank you for your devotion and rigorousness and follow through. It's a great blessing for everyone you benefit.
Thank you so much, Rob. I've really enjoyed the conversation.
Thanks for joining us for the Seaworthy podcast. Seaworthy exists to help people overcome their health challenges and be fully vital. If you think we've earned it, please consider giving this podcast a like, subscribing, and giving us a 5-star rating on the platform of your choice. Thanks.